And then there's only one more missed class that we'll miss during the semester, and that's the 24th of this week instead. And I do apologize for this. I really regret canceling classes, and it creates a hardship on you all, but we're going to limit the makeups to one evening. It is a Friday, which I'm not any happier about than you guys, but at least it's only one time during the semester. Okay? But a reminder, no class Wednesday night. Last class period, we finished the floating mean concept, the three ways in which a security interest can float, and then we moved into a set of problems on different types of goods, goods being the broad category and our four subsets, consumer goods, farm products, inventory, and equipment. And really, those aren't difficult problems and aren't designed to be difficult problems. There are some odd lines that the code draws. There's some inarticulate drafting, which makes it a little hard to figure out exactly what category you're in at any particular time. But for the most part, during this semester, we will be using goods as our collaborative because goods are easiest to understand. We can figure out the rules of Article 9 by using goods. And for the most part, it really doesn't matter what type of goods we're talking about. The rules with regard to goods are the rules with regard to goods. But sometimes you get special rules. We will later in the semester see several special rules. We've already seen one, but several special rules if we have consumer goods. We will see special rules if we have inventory. We will see one or two special rules where we have farm products, and I don't recall any special rules for equipment. It's just the rules that don't specifically apply to one of the others happen to apply to equipment. So I don't want to make too much of that exercise. I'm not all that likely on a final exam to give a question exactly like the one that you saw on that problem set. What I'm likely to do is to have a merchant, for example, who's selling goods from stock, and a buyer of those goods, and you would simply have to know that those goods are inventory, and then what I would probably be testing you on at that point would be the special rule, the special inventory rule, and you would have to know as background that those goods were inventory to get into the right rule and to take it from there. So again, it was sort of a building block kind of exercise. Today, I want to spend all of the class period, and I hope only all of the class period. In fact, in my dreams, I think, well, gee, maybe we'll get beyond this, and if we do, I will just lecture, because I didn't ask you to prepare beyond problem set 6 and 7. But realistically, these are more difficult for you conceptually. And so this is going to take a little bit of time. You know, with goods, it's easy to conceptualize what we're talking about. And it's easy to figure out how you foreclose if there's a default. Well, you grab the goods, you wholesale them, you sell them, and you turn them over to the buyer. That's actually slightly oversimplified, as you'll see when we get to Part 6 and the foreclosure rules. But for our early purposes in the course, that's all there is to it. And you take the money that you get from selling them and you apply it to the indebtedness. And if there's extra left over, you give it back to the debtor. And if there's still money left due and owing, you collect it from the obligor. There are extraordinary, valuable rights that consist of things other than goods. For example, one of the problems for tonight is, let's just say that Bill Gates and Paul Allen are back in the 1980s, but assume they have the modern version of Article they're in their garage and they come up with this idea for a computer program that'll open little windows on your screen, and a graphic user interface with the BIOS, so that everything. Know my terminology. So that things can be compartmentalized on the screen, and they think, this is a really cool idea. This might have some market potential. Okay, but they don't have any money, and so they go down to a local bank, and the bank says, "What do you have as collateral?" And they say, "Well, we've got this really cool idea." And the bank might say, well, how have you protected that idea? It's certainly true that there are common law protections for intellectual property, but the major protection for something like this might be a patent, but more likely a copyright. Actually, it might be either, but let's stay with copyright. And so the bank's lawyers say, well, gee, we might use your intellectual property interest as collateral, but we really need you to register it with the Federal Copyright Registry and gain copyright protection. Okay, so they do that, and they now have the copyright to Windows 1 or Windows 0.1. Okay, so now the bank takes a security interest, gives them a loan, and takes a security interest in their rights under the copyright. And their rights under the copyright are the intellectual property rights to Windows. Now, the collateral is obviously not goods, right? I mean, it's an idea. There may be sketches, drawings, code books, things like that. There may be things in writing. But taken all together, it's this one copyrighted idea, and it's not goods. Now, what value would it have if they defaulted on the loan? What would the bank do with this copyrighted intellectual property interest? I'm sorry?
Sell the idea.
Yeah, you can sell the idea, and whoever buys the idea then owns the idea, and if they choose to gear up, they can market Windows, right? So in a way, it's not terribly difficult to conceptualize. It's intellectual property rather than goods, but it's still a form of property, and you can sell it, and the buyer can acquire the right to make and distribute Windows. And of course, at the outset, the bank might have been taking a big gamble, but this would have been one that would have paid off pretty well, right? So, but it's not goods. So what is it? It's got to have an Article 9 name. It is personal property, right? Article 9 governs security interests in personal property and fixtures. Leave fixtures aside. Intellectual property is personal property. So what's the category?
Intangible?
I'm sorry?
Intangible?
It is intangible.
General intangible?
Yeah, it is an intangible right, but it has to have an Article 9 name. And the Article 9 name for this is a general intangible. So let's look. I always like to start discussing intangible property rights with the definition of general intangible. So let's look at it. And it's back in 9102, as all our definitions are. And as usual, I can't find it. There it is, 42. General intangible means any personal property, including things in action. That goes back to the old idea of choses in action. And I don't think it needs to be in there, because it says any personal property other than, and that almost certainly would have included things in action. In fact, the idea of things in action is sufficiently antiquated that we could have debates about what it is. So I would say, for our purposes, let's just ignore it. Okay? So general intangible means any personal property other than, and then we have a long list, right? Other than accounts. We're going to look at accounts. Yikes. We're going to look at accounts. Chattel paper. We're going to look at chattel paper. Commercial tort claims. We're not going to go there. I mean, we can't do everything in the code. so don't worry about it. Deposit accounts, that's money in a bank account. Notice the first exclusion was accounts, and then we have deposit accounts. So deposit accounts are things like savings accounts, checking accounts. Down the road somewhere, I might or might not say a word about them, but whereas accounts is an important category, deposit accounts for our purposes will be sort of a sideshow, if at all. Documents. I really wish we could talk about documents in this course. What we're talking about are what are called documents of title. Those are things like bills of lading, warehouse receipts, receipts issued by a bailee who is in possession of goods, and they have very special rules related to them. But alas, we cannot, and so you may ignore documents. We're just not going there. We can't. No time. Goods. Boom. You understand that's all four categories? When it says goods, that's all of them. Instruments. A few of you are in the payment systems class and you know what an instrument is. I want you all at the margins to know what an instrument is, but I'm going to make life easy for you. I will tell you when you're dealing with an instrument so that you don't have to guess. And if I tell you that you're dealing with an instrument, there are a couple of things I want you to know because they are important in the marketplace. But we will just touch on instruments. Investment property, that's just exceptionally complex. We're not going to touch it. Letter of credit rights, letters of credit, money. You can actually have a security interest in money, in currency. I will do a very small problem involving money, which is just a matter of reading a statute. So it's a very minor topic. Oil, gas, or other minerals before extraction. So there's our long laundry list. General intangible means everything other than one of those. The definition of general intangible is similar to the definition of equipment in what way?
It's a catch-all phrase.
It's a catch-all. But whereas equipment is a catch-all for goods, general intangible is a catch-all for the entire set of property rights that Article 9 encompasses. And so it turns out that the intellectual property rights, and we'll see as we go along, won't fit into any of these other terms. Okay? They're not goods, they're not accounts, they're not et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so they wind up being general intangibles. The term general intangible at the end includes payment intangibles and software. Again, those are very, very specialized. Payment intangibles is in the code almost exclusively to support loan participation arrangements, very sophisticated transactions. So we need to know what general intangibles are. You don't need to know what payment intangibles are, and you don't need to worry about software. It's an interesting topic, but it leads into some complexities that we just don't have time to deal with. Okay? So we have an intangible right, and it's a general intangible. If you were taking a security interest in just that Windows program, and that was your only collateral, you wouldn't use a description in the security agreement that involved a generic grouping. You wouldn't say, in other words, all general intangibles. You would say rights under federal copyright to Windows 1, whatever. I don't know exactly what the specific description would be for the particular asset, but you would use a specific description for that particular asset. On the other hand, if you are loaning money to a business, and at the end of the day, the business might go under, and you've taken a security interest in all their goods. You've taken a security interest in all inventory and equipment, and consumer goods are out of the question, and the business has nothing to do with farms. So all inventory, all equipment. and you've taken a security interest in all accounts and all thises and that's and the others, then you might also take a security interest in all general intangibles. What would that pick up? Well, if you decided to sell the entire business as a going concern in your foreclosure, wouldn't you want to be able to sell the goodwill of the business? I mean, you can't really sell it as a going concern unless you can convey the goodwill. Businesses have all kinds of rights. The business may be entitled to a federal income tax refund. That doesn't fit anywhere else. It winds up being a general intangible. So you would usually throw in at the end of the day all general intangibles to pick up all the other stuff that may be floating around out there. The business may own a great 800 number. My classic example of an 800 number was my daughter was considering college and she was thinking about Oregon. She wound up not going there. But we called him up and I'll never forget, it was 1-800 Viaduct. Well, if a business has an 800 number, there's value in it, a domain name, right? Rights to a domain name. So general intangible picks up all that stuff. Any questions so far? I think it's pretty easy. I shouldn't ask for questions and say it's real easy because then nobody will ask me a question. I'm not going to ask a question if it was easy. Okay. The general intangibles that I am most interested in represent rights to collect money. That's where the action is in the marketplace. Okay? So we go to, let's start with problem set 6. And we have buyer buys goods from seller on unsecured credit. So seller sells goods to buyer, and buyer owes money to seller. Now, what does it mean? What did you take from the term unsecured credit? I'm sorry? I'm not in Article 9. There's no security interest standing behind or securing the obligation. It's just an obligation to pay money. Right? If the buyer doesn't pay the seller has a cause of action, can sue, get a judgment, and then with the judgment, remember we talked about sending the sheriff out to start grabbing stuff and selling it. But you have no particular right to any asset. There's no Article 9 security interest coupled with the obligation to pay. So B has the goods and B doesn't pay. Can S go get the goods? I think I'm asking the same question a different way. Can S go get the goods? You sold goods, sold them on unsecured credit, you're not being paid, you feel bad about it, you want to go get your goods back, are you entitled to? I heard a bid. No? No, you didn't keep a property interest, right? When you sold the goods, who has title to the goods? The buyer has title to the goods when they've been delivered. And if the failure to pay, if there was intent to pay at the time of contract, and a failure to pay subsequent, we don't have voidable title, do we? There's no fraud. I'm not suggesting there's fraud here. If there was voidable title, then you could avoid the contract and get the goods back. But without voidable title, you have in effect given title to the goods to the buyer and taken in exchange a promise. Here's a key at this point in time. Your tendency to this date has been to look at that promise as a contractual right, something that you could sue on and recover a judgment. It's also a form of property. The right to collect the money is a property right. It has value, right? Correct? So S has a valuable property right. Now, S needs to borrow money. And so in our problem, S goes down to the bank, and the bank is going to make a loan And S is going to grant a security interest in its right to collect from buyer. And I'm using this buyer as sort of an example of what probably is a broad cluster of buyers. I mean, if this is a business and they're selling goods on unsecured credit, aren't there likely to be a bunch of buyers out here who owe money? So let's kind of assume that, because I want the collateral description in the security agreement to be a generic category. And so the first thing is you've got to remember that if the secured party doesn't have possession of the collateral and you can't possess this collateral, it's an intangible right. It exists in the air. If there's a piece of paper promising to pay the money, that's not the piece of paper is not a property right. It's just evidence of the obligation. So what's my category? I'm sorry?
An account.
Yeah, this is the category is accounts. This is an account, and if I only want to take a security interest in this one account, I would say security interest in, and I would name, put the name of so-and-so's obligation to so-and-so arising out of a contract of sale of date of such and such. But if what I want is a security interest in all the various payment rights owed by all the various buyers, I've got to pick a generic category. And I can say all accounts. And of course, if I've got an ongoing relationship, I want it to be all accounts, including after acquired accounts, the ones that arise in the future, including after acquired. Now, how did you get to accounts? Well, I suggested that you start there, right? That was hint number one. When you're dealing with a right to collect money as your collateral, which is where I'm putting the emphasis, we start with accounts, but then we have to look at the exclusions from accounts. So accounts are in section 9102(2). Account means a right to payment of a monetary obligation. I'm going to come back to this phrase, whether or not earned by performance. For the moment, skip it. A right to payment for a monetary obligation. And then there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 inclusions. And which one is this? I'm sorry, the first one? A right to payment of a monetary obligation for property that has been or is to be, in this case it has been, sold, and I can stop there, right? A right to payment for property that has been sold. And the goods that S sold B are property, right? So we call this an account. And I want to I don't want to take you into the exceptions. For the moment, I just want to say it doesn't fit with anyone. If you notice at the end of the definition of account, the term does not include 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is not in those, okay? So we start with account and we stay with account. We don't get kicked out elsewhere. So, when we were doing consumer goods, they were goods used or bought for use primarily for personal, family, or household purposes. We had a definition. Why is this not general intangibles? Because general intangible is all property other than long laundry list, including accounts. And this fits into accounts. Okay? With me enough to not ask questions? Slow me down anytime you want. Okay. So let's go to problem set 7. And let's figure out what it means to have a security interest in accounts. It's not hard to figure out that the security agreement, it's not hard to figure out that it is an account. It's not hard, I think, to figure out that your security agreement, which has to describe your collateral, should say all accounts. But what does it mean? Well, your collateral doesn't matter until there's a default, right? So what should happen in the event of default? Well, you might just hold a normal Article 9 foreclosure sale and sell all of the accumulated accounts to someone who buys them. Just like you could sell a car. What's that person then going to do? That person that owns the accounts, right? Yippee, I own accounts. What does it mean? What's the value of an account? Somebody owes you money, you get to collect it. Right? So what I want to, it can be done that way. The secured party can just hold a foreclosure sale and sell the accounts, but that's less common than the secured party collecting the accounts itself. Debtor defaults, secured party wants to collect the remaining amount owed by the buyer. Right? That's a way of squeezing the money out of the collateral. So we need a little bit of terminology here. We have a term for bank, don't we? Secured party. I'm going to give you another one in a couple of minutes. What's our term for S here?
The obligor.
Well, yes, the person obligated to pay this amount, but more importantly, I'm talking about the collateral here, not the obligation.
Oh, the debtor?
The debtor, yeah. Right? So this is our debtor. What about this person? Be handy if this person had a name. Then we could talk about them in the statute. What's that person's designation? Account debtor. Look at the definition of account debtor. It's the third definition. Account debtor means a person obligated on an account. Let's just stop there for a moment. Account debtor means a person obligated on an account. This is an account, the right to collect money, and this is the person obligated on the account. Okay? So this is my account debtor. Now, go to section 9607. And let's play around here for just a minute. (9607) Collection and enforcement generally. If so agreed, and in any event after default, a secured party may, and we're going to find that the answer is, a secured party may collect directly from this person. Okay? But I want to stop and talk about the upfront part, if so agreed, and in any event after default. Sometimes these arrangements are set up in the marketplace where the seller sells the goods to the buyer and tells the buyer from the outset, you're not going to pay me, you're going to pay my bank. And the bank and the debtor have worked out in advance that the payments, all of the payments from day one, will come directly to the bank. And that's just a matter of contract. There doesn't have to be a default. And you can see why a bank might want to set it up that way, because the money comes to them, and as they make collections, it reduces the amount of the obligation. So if the parties agree, then the secured party can collect the money. In any event, you can collect the money after default, and that's what we're focused on. After default, a secured party may notify an account debtor, or other person obligated on collateral. That phrase is primarily designed to pick up somebody obligated on an instrument, and I'll come back to make payment or otherwise render performance to or for the benefit of the secured party. So after default, the secured party can notify the account debtor to start paying it and stop paying the debtor. Okay? And then just to drive the point home, and I didn't reference this in the problems, and I probably should have. Look at 9607(3). If so agreed, in any event after default, a secured party may enforce the obligations of an account debtor. So what that's saying is you're basically stepping into the shoes of the seller, of the debtor, and using the debtor's rights. So you're in effect using the contract rights that S has to collect from B. But of course, what's the nature of the property right we're talking about? The property right we're talking about is S's right to collect from B. And now we're going to let the bank, secured party, make the collections itself. Okay? So how do you do it? What are the mechanics? 9607 says you're entitled to do it. It doesn't tell you how to go about doing it. It says you can notify the account debtor and collect the money, right? You notify the account debtor, enforce the rights of the debtor with regard to the obligation, and collect the money. If I put 9607A1 and 3 together. But again, what are the mechanics? What does the notification have to say? Dear B, send me money. Yours truly, bank you never dealt with. That'll get people to write checks. I mean, you got a letter like that, you're not going to respond to it, are you? You get a letter out of the blue.
So that's kind of part of it, right?
I got close to it.
Yeah. The only thing is you have to say is that right has been assigned.
And where did you get that? Where did you go to get the mechanics? So again, 607 establishes kind of the overarching right, but doesn't give you the down to the granular detail. And where did you go to get to the detail level?
9406.
Yeah, let's go to 9406. And 9406 is written very obliquely. And it uses terms, and there are reasons for it, and I don't want to take the long circuitous path it would take me to tell you why terms like asinore and asinine are used here. But let's spend a minute on it. Subject to this, that, or the other, we're talking about how an account debtor can discharge its obligation. Now, if I'm B, what do I want to have happen every time I send a monthly payment? Don't I want a partial discharge of my obligation? I want my obligation to be reduced. That's what I'm after. If I owe money to one of you over here on my right side, and I send a check to somebody over here on the left side, is my obligation reduced? No. I don't get a discharge by paying the wrong person. So 406A tells you who to pay in order to get a discharge. So an account debtor on an account, and that's all we're looking at right now. Skip the irrelevant language. An account debtor on an account may discharge its obligation by paying the assignor until but not after the account debtor receives a notification. There's that notice that we were talking about, notification. Back in 607, you may notify the account debtor and start collecting. Who's the assignor and who's the assignee? I got secured party, I got debtor, and I got account debtor, and 9406 is talking about assignor and assignee.
Would the debtor assign the payments or the accounts receivable to the secured party?
The grant of a security interest in payment rights functions to assign the rights, and the terms assignor and assignee are used here. And they're used because Article 9 applies to a set of transactions that we're not going to study in this course. And for that set of transactions, we need the terms assignor and assignee. But for purposes of 406, debtor is the assignor, and the debtor has assigned for the purpose of providing security for an obligation, the right to collect to the secured party, which is the assignee. So now I can translate my 9406 terminology into my more normal Article 9 terminology. Secured party is the assignee, debtor is the assignor. Account debtor is still the account debtor. Okay? So this first rule tells you that you'll get a discharge if you pay the person you think you're supposed to pay. You entered into a contract with S. The contract calls you for you to pay S. You should get a discharge by paying S unless something comes along to disrupt that. So the account debtor must receive a notification, authenticated, that means signed, remember? It's our fancy word for signed. By the assignor or the assignee, either one of them can sign it, that the amount due or to become due has been assigned. So you kind of notify them there has been an assignment of your obligation to pay, and that payment is to be made to the assignee. Directions from now on: make your payments to the assignee. That's that letter out of the blue that I was talking about. If you frame it the right way, it really does work. If my bank and my debtor are still talking to each other, if the debtor will cooperate, who would I prefer? Let's say I represent the bank. Who would I prefer to send that notification to the account debtor? Would I prefer the bank to sign it and send it, which it can do, right? That's what the statute says. Or would I prefer the seller up here to sign it and send it? I'm sorry?
The seller debtor.
Yeah, I prefer the seller to send it. Why?
Because that would mean more to the...
Yeah, that's not as out of the blue. I mean, it's a little bit out of the blue, but at least you're getting a notification from somebody you dealt with. Hey, that money that you've been owing to me, don't want you to pay me anymore. I want you to pay my bank, naming the bank and giving information about the address and how to go about it. But sometimes after default, these parties are at in such a strained relationship that you can't get cooperation. And so the code permits the secured party to do it itself. It's always preferable to have the assignor, the debtor, send the notification to the account debtor. And the notification has to be specific. The account has been assigned and you are to pay the assignee. After receipt of the notification, the account debtor may discharge its obligation by paying the assignee and may not discharge the obligation by paying the assignor. So this letter comes in, and you look at it and you say, well, I'm not going to pay that kind of thing. I owe money to my seller down here. I've been dealing with them forever. And you don't bother to check with them, and you don't bother to make any inquiries. You just say, I'm too bad. I'm not going to follow some instruction I got out of the blue. You throw the letter in the wastebasket, and you keep on paying money to good old S over here. And good old S over here runs off with it, squanders it, doesn't pass it through to the bank, so the bank doesn't get the benefit of it. And eventually, the bank gets around to coming after B. And remember, 9607, what did it say? Can the bank collect directly from B? What did 607 say? Yes. And all 406 said was, well, if you want to go collect from B, the only way you can force B to pay you is by sending this notification letting B know what's happening. right? Until then, it's not fair. Until B receives a notification saying pay the bank, it's not fair to make B pay anybody but S over here, all right? So B gets the privilege of paying a second time. You paid the wrong person. Could B then recover those payments that it made to S from S? And if so, on what theory? You're outside the code. Article 9 doesn't care about the answer to that question. It's just unjust enrichment. Sure. It's money that you weren't entitled to. It's a quasi-contraction. Sure. But the main point is you paid the wrong person, right? So there has to be a balancing mechanism, doesn't there? Account debtor gets this letter out of the blue from either of these parties. Even if the letter comes from this party, my account debtor might want to make sure that it was genuine, that it was legitimate, that it wasn't a hoax, a trick, sent by someone else pretending to be S. So what can the account debtor do in order to sort of forestall this rule that it's got to pay the assignee of the secured party? Is there a mechanism? Yeah.
Section C, they can request reasonable proof that it's actually been made.
Yeah. The section C, again, sort of forget the exceptions. If requested by the account debtor, an assignee shall seasonably furnish reasonable proof that the assignment has been made. So you might, in fact, at that point in time, want to provide the account debtor with either a copy of the security agreement or at least a copy of the portion of the security agreement showing the assignment. And if you're going to show a private contract right, you probably want to put in the contract that in the event of default you're going to be doing this, right? So that there's no argument that you've been divulging confidential information. There are bank confidentiality rules that could kick in. But the point is that the inquiry has to go to the assignee. And the assignee has to provide reasonable proof that the assignment has been made. And if a request is made, then pending the response to the request, what can you do? You can continue paying the original party and you get the discharge. And so you make the request. Until you get a response, then any payments due can be made to the original debtor up here, the assignor. You get your discharge, you get the benefit of that payment. And then once you get a response, if it provides reasonable proof of the assignment, then at that point in time you're locked in. And you must pay the assignee. And suppose you get a response and you look at it and say, well, it doesn't prove it to me. I don't think that's good enough. And you go and pay an S up here. Is it the account debtor's subjective impression of the information provided, or is it objectively reasonable? It's obviously drafted as objectively reasonable, right? Unless the assignee complies, the account debtor. The assignee shall reasonably furnish reasonable proof, not proof satisfactory to the account debtor. Reasonable proof. So let me take it one step further. He gets this letter out of the blue, signed by the bank, let's say, saying, your obligation to pay S, the merchant here, has been assigned to us, and from now on you're to make the payments to us. B wants proof, and so writes for proof. Pending the response, any payments that come up pending the response, B continues to pay S and is protected. The response comes back, and B is in a quandary. B still isn't convinced that it's good enough, and B is worried that it will be paying the wrong person if it pays the bank, but B, of course, is also now worried that it will be paying the wrong person if it pays S, right? Who do I pay? What can you do then? You're outside Article 9, by the way. This is, you all are surely on reruns at least, have seen the old All in the Family. Archie Bunker had an expression. He used to say, I'm in a foundry. So you're in a quandary.
You get a declaratory judgment?
I'm sorry?
A declaratory judgment?
Yes, but there's a better mechanism.
Can you set up an escrow account?
Yes, but there's a better mechanism. Do you know what an interpleader is? In an interpleader, B sues S and bank. Okay? And B deposits the money with the clerk of the court, the money at issue. Okay? And then B, who's been left in this situation under the interpleader rules of most jurisdiction, will be entitled to its court costs and perhaps even attorney's fees, which ought to be pretty minor. I mean, you file the lawsuit and withdraw. You file the lawsuit and then you just withdraw, and it leaves it to these two parties to work it out. So you've made your payment. You make all your payments to the clerk until this thing has been resolved, and you let these two fight it out as to who's entitled to it. Well, in these circumstances, if in fact S is in default on the obligation, then the bank ought to be able to get a judgment in the interpleader action very, very quickly. And it functions kind of like, who said declaratory judgment? Functions like a declaratory judgment. It's just that you make your payments to the clerk, which is the add-on feature. And it does function like an escrow account. It's that you're using the court as the escrow account. So the concept is interpleader. I just, sometimes I like to push out and talk about the processes that are available in certain situations. It's not really an Article 9 issue. It's if you owe money, and it might go to either of two people and you're not sure which and you don't want to guess, then what you do is you create an interpleader, start an interpleader action. File the lawsuit, get your fees back out, and let the other two fight it out for the money. All right, everybody okay? So it's pretty straightforward, right? If B owes money monthly, and the bank down here decides, well, I wish that wasn't monthly payments. I'm going to send a notification to B that says, you know what, pay me the entire rest of the debt right now. Yeah, I know you were making monthly payments to your seller, but I don't want to fool with getting monthly payments. I want everything. I want it all at once. Make a lump sum payment to me. Obviously, the bank can't do that, right? But what in the code makes that clear? Go back to 607, the provision that I should have added to the problem, but didn't. 607.3 says that what the bank is doing is enforcing the debtor's obligation with respect to the rights against the account debtor. What you're doing is you're enforcing this contract, and if this contract allows this party to pay in installments, then this party is entitled to pay the bank down here in installments. Okay? That's a take on the digital study assignments at all in contracts. I never get there when I teach contracts. So. But there's a common saying that an assignee steps into the shoes of the assignor and has no greater contract rights than. All right, I know I got a lot of stuff up here, but I hope this isn't terribly difficult. What's my collateral type? It's an account. If I don't know it's an account, and I describe my security interest as all chattel paper, but it's not chattel paper, then I don't have a security interest. I got none of these rights. I misdescribed. My security agreement has to describe my collateral. My collateral is not chattel paper. My collateral here is an account.
Got a little confused. You said that the bank in this case can accelerate the debt?
No. The bank can only accelerate the debt if the seller could accelerate the debt under the contract. So, for example, if you sent the notification, you sent reasonable proof, payments are supposed to come to you, and all of a sudden the account debtor stops making payment, and under the contract between the seller and the account debtor, the seller could accelerate the debt. Well, you are allowed under 9607A3 to enforce the seller, in this case, the assenor's rights with respect to the contract, so you could accelerate them. But the bank's rights are no greater, bank's collection rights are the same as and no greater than the collection rights of the original obligee. Okay. Well, we've covered a huge amount of what I want you to get in this area. So I got a seller who sells goods to a buyer. Sound familiar? And the buyer owes money to the seller and is going to pay in monthly installments, like we said before. But the seller has also taken back a security interest in the goods that it sold as collateral for the obligation. So my seller has invoked Article 9 this time. Remember the problem I gave you a few minutes ago was unsecured credit? So now we're going to move to secured credit. So the contract between these two parties sets out the payment obligation, but also sets out that buyer grants to S a security interest in, and it describes the goods, okay? It's just a normal Article 9 transaction. The collateral is goods. I don't have anything intangible in here. But S does own contract rights again, right? Are S's contract rights more valuable, you think, this time than S's contract rights when all S had was unsecured debt? I mean, the same amount of money might be owed, but if it's not paid, you can resort to the collateral. So in the marketplace, this kind of contractual right sells better. Lenders are more willing to extend credit against this kind of obligation than against an unsecured obligation. So now, S wants to borrow money from a bank. So we're going to have a loan. And I'm going to have a security agreement. And again, I'm using B here as an example, and I got a bunch of other B's out here who are doing the same thing, buying on secured credit. And so I want to use a generic category. And my generic category is all something, including after acquired of that species. And it is a right to payment of a monetary obligation, isn't it? For property that has been sold. So it starts out looking like an account. But it's not an account. What is it, and how do I get there? How do I get out of account? My only way out of account is through an exception. It is a right for payment of a monetary obligation for property that has been sold. It fits the definition of account. So unless I've got an exception, I have to stay in account, and all my answers will be the same as my answers last time.
Because one of the exceptions is chattel paper.
Is for what's called chattel paper. How do you know this is chattel paper?
Because it requires a monetary obligation on a security agreement.
Yeah, so we got to go to the definition of chattel paper and see if it fits, right? And it will. But let's go look at it. So 9102A, I think it's 11. Lost my numbers.
11.
No, I know it's 11. I was
No, I
30
know.
pages past the definition a minute ago. Chattel paper means a record or records. What's a record? It's a type of record. I've got documents on my computer that are in Word format. Are they writings? No. Are they records? Yes. A record is either a physical writing or an electronic document that is retrievable in perceivable form. So, a record or records, here I've made things easy. I don't want to get into putting multiple records together. I've got one document that includes both the monetary obligation and the security interest. It's all written together. Paragraph 1, here's what you owe us, here's how you pay it back. Paragraph 2, you also grant us a security interest in the following goods. So let's stay with one record. Chattel paper means a record, or records, that evidence both a monetary obligation and a security interest in specific goods. I can stop right there, can't I? Haven't I picked that up? There are other variations. And we're going to only look at one of the other variations, and we'll do it later on. But isn't that exactly what I've got? A record that includes both a monetary obligation and a security interest in specific goods? So it fits within chattel paper, and that takes it out of account. The two most important payment right categories for our purposes are going to be accounts and chattel paper. I will touch on instruments, but I will always tell you when you're dealing with an instrument, because I don't want you to have to learn the rules of what is and what is not an instrument, because that gets you into negotiability. That's the Article 3 course, and it's hard enough for those of you taking it without me trying to teach it in this course. So, terminology. Secured party. This is a secured party too, isn't it? But this is don't I have two different secured transactions? This is a secured transaction, and this is the secured party, and this is the debtor. But this is also a secured transaction, and this is the debtor, and this is the secured party, right? I'm using a security interest to serve as collateral for another obligation. With me? So in this transaction, what is this person called? I need a name. I was dealing with accounts a few minutes ago and it said account debtor. But if you go to the definition of account debtor, it means the person obligated on an account, chattel paper, or a general intangible. I need a broad-based term, and account debtor picks it up. There's an exception, but it's an exception we're not going to worry about. So I got an account debtor over here. And if the parties agree up front before there's a default, we could arrange for the payments to come to bank from the outset. But 9607 says, if so agreed and in any event upon default, so let's assume they haven't agreed in advance, that B has been paying S, but S defaults to bank. Can bank collect from B? 9607? 9607A1 says you can collect from an account debtor. And 9607A3 says you can enforce the debtor's rights with regard to the obligation. What else does 9607A3 say? Drill a little deeper into this. 9607A3. What am I looking at there? You can enforce the obligation of the account debtor. That's the obligation to pay money. Can you enforce the underlying security interest? That's what it says, isn't it? It says it obliquely. The secured party may enforce the obligations of an account debtor and exercise rights of the debtor with respect to the obligation of the account debtor. Skip a little. And with respect to any property that secures the obligations of the account debtor. Okay? So my bank can enforce all of the rights of S. Now, unless B defaults under this contract, nobody can go after these goods. I mean, B's entitled to pay off this contract, and then the security interest up here will be extinguished. So what would be the first step you want to take? I mean, you don't really want to resort. In fact, you can't in the first instance resort to the underlying collateral up there, the goods, as long as B is making the payments. Nobody can. So don't you want the money to come to you? Right? So how does the secured party get the money to come to it? What's the mechanics? I'm sorry?
Are you talking about the waiver?
Waiver.
I read something about waivers.
Well, I don't doubt that. but it didn't relate to the... But I don't know what it would have been in this context. How did we collect when it was an account? Send a notification, right? Does that same rule work here? Would make sense here, wouldn't it? If what you want to do is collect the money from B over here, can you use 9406A? Does it apply? Yes. See, 9607 says, yeah, you can collect it. Go figure out how to do it. 9406 is the how do you do it rule. 9406A, subject to an account debtor on an account chattel paper. An account debtor on chattel paper, right? May pay the assignor, so don't I have to use assignor and assignee again here? For a purpose, only when I'm in 406. This person can pay this person until it receives an authenticated notification from either of these folks telling it that the obligation has been assigned and they're to pay the assignee. It's exactly the same set of rules. No difference. So you set it up so that the payments are to come this way. If B defaults, if you have sent the notification, if reasonable proof was requested, you've provided it. B is supposed to pay you, and the only way to get a discharge now is to pay the bank. And B defaults. Do you have a set of rights now that you would not have had when we were dealing with an account? And what is that set of rights? When it was an account, there was no collateral. You just could sue on the debt, get a judgment, send the sheriff out, start grabbing stuff. Here, can you go after those goods? If B defaults, you are enforcing the rights of S under the contract, including the rights, 9607A3, including the rights with respect to property that serves as collateral for the obligation of the account debtor. So you have two sets of rights with chattel paper, whereas with accounts you had only the right to collect the money. Here you have the right to collect the money, and if there is a default, You have the right to go repossess the collateral because you've stepped into S's shoes and hold an Article 9 foreclosure sale, sell the goods, and apply the goods to the indebtedness. And then if still more money is owed, if it doesn't pay everything off, the entire obligation of the account debtor, we can still sue the account debtor for deficiency. But again, the easiest way for you all to conceptualize this, you get hung up in all this stuff and all this terminology. Article 9 permits the bank to hop into this set of shoes and to enforce whatever rights this person has. This person has a right to be paid and a right to foreclose on these goods if there's a default in payment. And all we've done is switch the obligation to pay, like a railroad track switch. We've switched so that the obligation to pay flows this way, and this is now the party that has access to the collateral, the right to foreclose on the collateral if our friend B over there fails to pay. So, what's the difference between accounts and chattel paper? One thing definitional. If I didn't know what I was talking about here and I put, oh, let's see, I'm a brand new bank and I'm a brand new banker and somebody told me something about Article 9 and I've heard about accounts, and that's when money's owed, so I write up a security agreement and say all accounts. Do I have a security interest at all? I do not, because these are not accounts. So you've got a categorization problem. You've got to put them in the right cubby hole. Having put them in the right cubby hole, you got to know what to do with them. And what to do with them is, with accounts, collect them. With chattel paper, collect them, and then if there's a default, resort to your account. Okay. You know, chattel paper doesn't have to be on paper. Because, I mean, up until the computer revolution it did, because that's all we had. And it was called chattel paper, and the term wasn't changed. It was chattel paper in the 1950s, and it's still chattel paper. But if that document there, that record that shows the monetary obligation and the security interest is in electronic form, then we actually have a term for it in Article 9, and really all I want you to do is give me the term. It's called electronic chattel paper. And there is a ton of electronic chattel paper out there. The large entities that are generating chattel paper are doing it electronically, which makes transfer and record keeping hard. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be? Isn't that kind of a pointless term to have? Since record covers electronic mediums as well.
Yeah. We're talking about this contract between S and B. If it's in writing, it's a record. And the collateral is chattel paper. There's actually a term we call it tangible chattel paper. If this is in electronic form, we call it electronic chattel paper. And the reason we make that distinction, I really only want you to learn the terms today. The next point I'm about to make, we're going to circle back to later in the semester, is that when we come to perfecting our security interest, unlike accounts where if there's a writing, it's nothing but evidence of the debt. With chattel paper, we treat that record as if it were a sort of a form of property, and possession means something. And so taking possession of tangible paper, chattel paper, has an effect that you don't have to worry about for today. But you can't take possession of electronic chattel paper. So Article 9 creates a term called control, and you control it in an electronic system. And the reason we break it down into tangible chattel paper and electronic chattel paper is when we get to those rules later on about how to perfect. With tangible chattel paper, one of the ways you can perfect is to take possession of it. With electronic chattel paper, one of the ways you can perfect is to gain control of it. And the big point I want to make is that control today has become the electronic counterpart of physical possession. When we have electronic stuff that we need to take possession of, we don't call it possession, we call it control. Okay? Does that get at your I mean, again, I'm getting beyond where I was today. Today, I only wanted to introduce the terminology. I want you to learn the terminology, and I do want you to learn the collection, basic collection rights.
So when you're creating the security interest between the seller and the bank, if you categorize it as all chattel paper, would that encompass electronic chattel
Yes.
paper, or would you have to say
No, if you say all chattel paper, again, it's one of these situations where you have a broad term and then narrower terms. You would always just say all chattel paper, the security agreement, and pick up everything. And then from the bank's perspective, it's the one that wants to gain perfection, to gain protection from third parties. And if it is tangible, then one of the ways it can accomplish its goal is to possess it. And if it's electronic, one of the ways it can accomplish its goal is to capture it, gain control of it. So in the security agreement, I'm not going to differentiate. I mean, after all, if I have a security interest in all chattel paper, including after acquired chattel paper, and when I start the transaction set, everything is in writing, but my bank customer, my seller over here, shifts to electronic documentation, I don't want to suddenly not be having a security interest in the electronic stuff. So all chattel paper picks it all up. All right? Okay. 5 minutes left. Let me take a look at my notes and see if there's anything I can usefully do. And if not, I'm perfectly happy to come back to this next time. Like I said at the outset, I didn't quite expect to get all the way through this. Let me do this though, and here's what we'll do with a couple of remaining minutes. In handout 6, I'm going to give you these categories. I'm going to assume that you've either done the work and this confirms your answer, or that you'll ask me next Monday. And if you don't ask me next Monday, then I'm not going to do each of these problems serially. So problem 1 was accounts. Problem 2 was chattel paper. Problem 3 is an account. A right to monetary payment for services rendered is within the definition of account. Software company enters into a non-exclusive license agreement pursuant to which you will pay SC $15 per month for 1 year. So it's a stream of income. What you've basically done is instead of selling goods, you've sold access to a software program and you have a stream of income. It's an account. Okay? It's in the first part of account, property that has been sold, leased, licensed. This is a license arrangement. But the answer is it's an account. These are just different types of typical market transactions that yield something that falls into the category of account. There's a whole lot of stuff out there in the world that's accounts. It's a big category. If you win a government-sponsored lottery and want to use it as collateral for a loan, in other words, if I had won the billion-dollar lottery, I would have taken the cash option. But if I had been dumb enough to take 20 years of payments instead of the cash option, and then I regretted it and wanted to borrow money from the bank, and I had gone down to the bank and used my right to collect 20 years worth of lottery payments, what are the rules that would have governed the use of that as collateral for a loan from the bank? It's an account. It's if you see, like, I think it's number 8, 7 or 8 within account, winnings in a government-sponsored lottery or game of chance. So that would be an account. Problem 5, software company owns the intellectual property. Now here's the dividing line. This is not a stream of money. This is not a collection right. 1, 2, 3, and 4 were collection rights. 3 of them were accounts. The one where there was collateral for the original obligation was chattel paper. But this is just intellectual property rights. This isn't a payment right. We wouldn't start with account. It's not an account. It's not chattel paper. We started the class off with this today, and it's just a general intangible. Okay? Problem 6 we'll come back to. Actually, we'll come back to the rest of this, although we'll do it fairly quick. In handout 7, we have done problems 1, 2, and 3. So we have problem 4. Okay? I've got very little of this. for next class. Do all of handout 8 and nothing more. Okay. There's not much reading for handout 8. Here's what we're about to do. We're about to shift into the universe of perfection. We've done attachment, and we've done our collateral categories, and we have some basics. We're about to shift into a world in which we're going to now have priority contests. A secured party has a security interest in an asset, and some third party invades it and wants to acquire a right in the collateral that's higher than the secured party's right in the collateral. And before we discuss perfection, I think you need to know a little bit about the consequences of perfecting or not perfecting. So I'm going to give you basic priority rules that we will then come back to. It will seem like thousands of times, but I won't. It's another building block set. Handout 8, I might well get beyond it, but I'll do it purely lecture. All right, no class Wednesday. See you later.